Right, we expect the Japanese yen to appreciate for next year from the current level to around the range of the 140, 145, following the BOJ's rate hike as well as the rate cuts by the Federal Reserve. The recent statement by the Mr. Ueda about the inflation in Japan revealed that we are on the right track to normalize the Japanese policy rates. And so we expect the BOJ to raise rates by 25 basis points, maybe in December or January next year, following the confirmation about the healthy growth in the inflation rate in Japan. But after that, we expect that the BOJ would maintain that level of the policy of around 50 basis points, possibly for the entire year of the 2025, to confirm that the inflation, baseline inflation in Japan is really becomes a sustainable situation. On the other hand, the US interest rate policy would also see some changes next year. Mr. Trump's tax and tariffs would result in a higher inflationary environment in the US economy, which might reduce the pace of the rate cut by the Federal Reserve next year, as we expected in the past. Having said, we expect the Fed to cut rates to the level about 375, 350 to make the economic growth sustainable under the new administration. So together with this narrower interest gap between Japan and the US, I think naturally US dollar should fall against the Japanese yen, and level would be modest, like 140, 145. And there are some structural money flows from Japan to the overseas countries from the individual sectors. Like household sector is putting more money into the global equity investments, and this is going to be the supportive factor for the US dollar and the other currencies. But narrow interest rate gap would result in a slightly higher Japanese yen relative to the current level. Right, I think this corporate reform is a very unique and sustainable driver for the Japanese equity markets for next year as well. And March 2023 is a time when the TSE introduced these initiatives to encourage the listed corporation to think more about the cost of equity and also the share price. And after almost 2 years' time, almost 90% of the companies listed in the prime markets revealed their plan to raise their return on equity. And 47% of the companies in the standard markets also revealed the plan. And I think this corporate reform is really becoming effective with the support from the environmental change, especially in terms of the ownership structure of the Japanese firms. The ownership structure of the Japanese firms have shown quite a radical changes recently, especially through the unwinding of the shareholdings. And we used to have shareholders from banks and businesses who became the major owner for many Japanese firms, but these shareholders were not necessarily very straight in terms of the intervention about the corporate governance and so forth. Now the foreign investors and investment trusts are gaining the share in terms of ownership in Japan, and these investors are very, very vocal, influential investors in their profitability as well as the corporate governance. And a good example is the activists. There are an increasing number of the shareholders' proposals in the annual shareholders meeting in Japan, and in some cases the proposals by the corporations are rejected by these activist investors and influential investors. So this real pressure really makes the reform of the Japanese corporate sector very effective. So these plans revealed by the corporations after this initiative is introduced is now in the process of the monitoring whether or not Japanese companies are going to really change in a way that these companies actually show them, the investors, to change. I think this question is really related to the second question about the corporate reform. Revisions are good, and valuation have some potential for the rise for Japan. And for the value investing in Japan, I think there are still many companies undervalued, below the level of the price-to-book ratio of 1. And these are the firms that are now very serious to revitalize their profitability or restructure their balance sheets so that they can provide.
投资一定有风险，基金投资有赚有赔，申购前应详阅公开说明书，投资人须知。